Welcome to the Best Games You Never Played podcast.
Your only podcast that discusses the best games that sold under 1 million copies.
I'm Chris.
And I'm Nick.
And today we're covering Advance Wars Days of Ruin for the Nintendo DS.
Now, with this game, just like Mega Man X Command Mission, I don't really know much of this game. But Chris here, he's an expert.
Well, I do know quite a bit about the series. I'm not quite as knowledgeable for the Wars series as I am for Mega Man, but I do know quite a bit. Yeah. I know that the series started in 1988 on the Famicom, which was titled Famicom Wars, and was only in Japan. And the first 6 games in the series were actually only in Japan for many different of Nintendo's consoles: the Famicom, the Super Famicom, the Game Boy, and Game Boy Color. And that some of the games in the War series were actually developed by Hudson Soft and not Intelligent Systems.
Now, Intelligent Systems, they made like the Fire Emblem series, the Paper Mario series. They worked on WarioWare, Codename Steam, and even big franchises like Mario Kart or Super Smash Brothers, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they helped out with those series some, and do have quite a repertoire of their own when it comes to games. They are a second-party Nintendo company, so basically Nintendo owns a majority stock in them, and they just make games for the Nintendo handhelds for the most part. Well, for Advance Wars was not the first game that they released in America. Intelligent Systems did, but it's the first turn-based strategy game that Nintendo's ever really helped publish. So it did pretty well, the first game, back in 2001. Actually, a fun fact, it came out a day before 9/11, so talk about bad timing there.
That's not good.
Yeah. No.
But they didn't know, so.
No, they didn't know it was happening, but yeah, and it actually gave Nintendo kind of confidence in like, oh, this game's doing pretty well. Why don't we bring over our other turn-based strategy series that's big in Japan, Fire Emblem. And it took a little while. Fire Emblem has some highs and lows as far as sales go, but with Fire Emblem Awakening in 2012, I believe, for the 3DS, the series just took off, and ever since then it's been
that's
one
when
of the
I've
best
seen
sellers.
like people really get invested in the series.
Mm-hmm.
So, Days of Ruin. This is the second DS Advance Wars game, correct?
Yes, actually, for E3 2007, when it was announced, it was actually going to be called Advance Wars DS2 originally.
What was the first one called? It was what was it? Dual Strike?
It was Dual Strike. The reason why it was called that is because they had the Dual Strike system, which let you use 2 CEOs at once, and you could actually charge up their superpowers, both of theirs, and actually have 2 turns in 1 turn, basically. And that kind of broke the game and made it super unbalanced. Not to mention that there were a lot of enemy types, like units that you could get that would also kind of break the game. New ones that they introduced to kind of try and keep it fresh.
Okay. Speaking of keeping things fresh, by my understanding, this game has a completely different style compared to the older Advance Wars games.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it does. That's mainly because the Wars series, it was doing pretty successful in Japan until they moved to the Game Boy Advance, and then the numbers started to drop. One of the reasons for that is because they didn't release it in Japan until they had Advance Wars 2 already out, so they released it as like a dual pack. So people kind of just weren't really interested in it. But yeah, they wanted to appeal to a Western audience because that's where most of their sales came from. And that's what this game does. It's definitely a lot more gritty, not really super cartoony.
Yeah, the original ones were more happy-go-lucky, a little bit more colorful, stuff like that. But then this game is more like sad, and you just feel bad.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'd almost compare it to like what you see on a Saturday morning cartoon versus what you'd see maybe late night on Toonami for Cartoon Network. It's still anime, but it's definitely a lot darker.
So the game came out January 21st, 2008 in North America, but it didn't come out in Japan.
Well, actually, it did come out in Japan, but it never got a physical release. It came out for the Nintendo eShop in October 2013, and that's because, again, the game was stylized for North Americans, and they thought that the Japanese really wouldn't like it, which is strange, Japanese company not making a game for the Japanese audience. But that's what they decided to do, and yeah, no one really got it on the eShop either because you had to get it through Club Nintendo of Japan, which is something that only so many people really log on to anyways.
So I did a little research, and I found out that the North American and the European versions, although they're the same game, the characters and the dialogue and basically all the text are different. Even the name itself, in Europe, it's called Advance Wars Dark Conflict. And the reason is because Nintendo of Japan, they sent the Japanese version to North America and Europe, untranslated, so they had to translate them separately. So that's why each region has they have their own, basically their own game. Even though the gameplay is the same, everything else is different.
That's interesting. That almost makes me want to watch like a Let's Play of the European version, because I've only played the American one and I only know the story of the American one. So I kind of want to see where it changes,
Yeah.
Little things for sure. But then, like I said before, the developers did want to kind of rein it back to be a little bit more balanced than Dual Strike was. So they got rid of the Super CO powers that were introduced in Advance Wars 2 and only had it to where you could use regular CO powers, just like in Advance Wars 1. They limited the amount of units. They did take away a lot of units, but they did add some new ones as well. But overall, the unit count's definitely a decent amount, like 10, 15 lower than Dual Strike was. And the reason they did that was to fit the more realistic setting. They wanted the actual game to kind of be like, oh, it's a struggle. It's a war.
Yeah.
You're going to be struggling no matter what. And that does definitely reflect on the difficulty of the game. This game is probably the hardest in the Advance Wars series. I wouldn't say it's as hard as some Fire Emblem games, if you're familiar with that. But it is still quite the challenge, especially if you play it. And there is no hard mode on all the other ones. There are hard modes. But the reason for that is because you had side missions. Because you had the main campaign, which is just a normal route, and then you can unlock these side missions.
And those are basically the hard mode.
Yeah, exactly. Optional kind of content that's harder than the rest of the game.
I know that I had a tough time picking it up and playing it because I'm not used to these type of games. So just jumping into it was kind of there was definitely a learning curve there.
Yeah, and this game, compared to all the other ones, I would say definitely is not the most newcomer friendly for the franchise, because I definitely went in with an advantage. I bought this game when it was new back in 2008, a long time ago, and I've been playing Advance Wars since I was 4 or 5, so I knew everything that there was to know about it, as far as certain weaknesses for certain units, that kind of stuff. So I kind of had a step up, but I couldn't imagine someone getting in on this one. It's not a bad jumping in point because the setting is so different. But I would probably recommend going for the first one if you haven't played any of the Advance Wars games.
So the game sold, not the best, about 610,000 copies worldwide. Which, a worldwide number like that's pretty bad. If that was in America, it would still be bad. But worldwide, it's just kind of sad.
Yeah.
But we kind of blame the Japanese on that one.
Yeah, exactly. For some reason, they weren't super receptive to it. I don't know if it was because of the fact that it was a sequel to a series that they already weren't too big on. And, of course, they translated it to the American perspective to appeal to American audience. But to get into some of the reception for the game, for the people that did play it, Game Rankings gave it an 85.37. Metacritic has a 86 between the fans and the critics. And IGN gave it an 8.6 out of 10, and G4 TV gave it a 4 out of 5. So overall, this game was not poorly received. It was probably the best received game that we've played on this podcast.
Yeah, I would say so. And it's definitely not a bad game, but do you think maybe the style of game kind of caused the sales to go down?
I think so, because I know, coming from me as someone that was a longtime fan, even back then, of the series, it was a pretty big drastic shift to go to the dark, gritty kind of setting, and that's how all games were going back then. It kind of felt that way. All the retro series, it's everything's got to be like Call of Duty and just get dark and brown and use less color. So, I still bought it, but that did deter me a little bit from maybe enjoying it as much as I did some of the other ones. But I still think it's really good, and But I could definitely see that being probably the biggest factor for longtime fans.
So obviously the art style definitely changed. But do you think the gameplay itself changed drastically throughout the series, like into this game? Because based on all the Advance Wars games that I've ever played, which is like the first one and then this one, they're pretty similar.
Yeah, the overall gameplay is similar. It's still an overhead turn-based strategy game, and you still have to build units, and they're kind of expendable. You can kind of put them in the fodder kind of thing. The only things that really change the gameplay is not the whole core gameplay, but just little things, like kind of micro things with the new units and stuff, and like I said, the lack of Super CO powers. But overall, it doesn't change the gameplay in a significant enough way where fans of the series would be kind of deterred from it,
How do you think the second screen really, do you think it helps with the gameplay? Because I actually really liked it.
Yeah, I'm not actually like super big on it. Like, I don't dislike it at all. I don't think it takes anything away from this game. If anything, it does make it a better Advance Wars experience. But I don't really ever use a touchscreen whenever I'm playing Advance Wars because whenever you're using the buttons, you can just press L and it'll go to your next unit that wasn't selected.
So
that's pretty nice.
I'll be honest with you, I did not know that you can use the buttons.
Yeah.
I was playing the game touchscreen.
Really? You didn't know at all? That's
No.
surprising. Yeah, you can use the buttons.
I probably would have liked it a little bit better. Speaking of that, touch controls, they worked.
Yeah, they definitely weren't bad for like, because like you gotta think of it like this. For touch controls, is that a turn-based strategy game is almost the perfect environment to have touch controls because it's grid-based and you're just pointing on the screen. Hey, this unit go here, this unit go there. Build something on this base, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So it's almost lending itself perfectly to having touch screen controls.
But in my experience with the game, playing with touch controls, I actually kind of enjoyed it. It just, I don't know, it kind of came naturally to me. But the one thing that I can tell you I did not like, the dialogue.
Oh boy.
I thought it was just, I don't know, it didn't hook me. Maybe it's because, there's no voice acting in these games. It's just a bunch of... But other than that, games like Fire Emblem, this game, even Persona, at least the earlier ones, Persona 5 does have pretty good voice acting. But a lot of them just had, these weird noises for the text. And I never really liked that. Even as a kid, I never really liked it.
Yeah, it's interesting. And kind of piggybacking off of that is that it is a lot of text, too. There is a lot of text in between each mission. You kind of have to read a book, almost, when you play this game, kind of thing.
Yeah, and as a guy with, really bad eyes, it's kind of, just tiring a little bit.
I could see that. So, but you said you don't like the sound effect they use for the voice acting, or the talking, I guess, what is supposed to...
I'd rather hear the voices rather than reading it myself.
Yeah, unfortunately the DS was not capable of such things. But what did you think of the music and the sound effects of the game?
The sound effects were really good, like actually in combat. It was they were really good at trying to immerse people.
Yeah.
Into the Advance War, so to say. The music was pretty good too. I have no issue with it. Everything fit the way it should have. There was nothing really out of place.
I agree with that for sure. And going with the theme of the game being darker, the game didn't have quite as many happy-go-lucky kind of upbeat soundtrack moments that I really liked, but it still had some pretty good bangers overall. And whenever there are some serious moments, they do have some actually decent serious songs that aren't kind of just jokes. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I think they did pretty well with that. And yeah, I agree with you with the sound effects, making you feel like you're really a part of it kind of thing. And yeah, it's pretty crazy. It almost has like a 3D sound effect kind of feel to it, which is really impressive for the DS.
So earlier, you were telling me about the online multiplayer. So why don't you tell us a little bit about your experience with that?
Yeah. I actually had this game when the online play was still active, and it wasn't bad, actually. You just kind of linked up with a random stranger and played a game of Advance Wars, and as long as they didn't rage quit or something, then it was a good time. You did have a lot of people rage quit because there's definitely a certain point where you can tell, all right, I'm probably going to lose this one kind of thing. So people would just rage quit.
So how does the multiplayer work anyway? I never played this game or any of them multiplayer before.
Oh, it's just like facing the computer almost. Usually you're set on a map where the two sides are even, and you can build your own bases or build your own units off your bases and that kind of stuff. Sometimes it's you have a predetermined amount of units and you face off each other, and there's no building, and there's like things like fog of war and snow that can either make it hard to see or slow down your units. But you can also, one thing that I forgot to mention that's really important for the series is that ever since Advance Wars, you can actually play multiplayer with just one game card and not have to use any others.
Oh, with DS Download Play, right?
No, not DS Download Play, actually. This is from the GBA era that they did this in. You can just take a turn and pass the Game Boy or the DS around and be like, okay, it's your turn.
That's actually kind of a cool idea. If they ever came out with another one, I can definitely see them doing that on Switch. Or maybe, just having a nice multiplayer mode where you play with the Joy-Cons.
Yeah, like split the Joy-Cons.
I feel like that would be a good Switch game.
Yeah, no, it definitely would be, and that is probably one of the most important things about the series, actually, that I forgot to mention. It's super cool, and I haven't really seen any other Game Boy games do that, because you need the link cable for every other game.
Yeah.
You could use the link cable if you both had the game, but if not, just here you go, kind of thing, which is really nice.
So, I think I can already guess what your final thoughts are.
Oh, okay. Overall, I really do like the game, but there are some definite flaws. I think it's the best story of Advance Wars, but I don't really play Advance Wars for the story. I play it for the fun turn-based strategy gameplay. And this game still has it, but without being as upbeat as the other games in the series, and without having some of the memorable music that some of the other games have, I really think it does falter in some points. I'd probably give it like a 7 or an 8 out of 10 personally, and that's coming from someone that's super biased about the series and loves every game in it. I still love this game, but you should definitely give it a chance, but I definitely wouldn't start with it.
Yeah, and coming from one who has no bias towards the series, I will say that I didn't have a bad time playing it. I'm still not a fan of these type of games like this and turn-based, RPGs.
Like Final Fantasy Tactics.
Yeah, like stuff like this. I never really could get into them. I did kind of enjoy Advance Wars, but I was playing the more easy stuff. I feel like if I got into the harder stuff, I would just hate the game.
Yeah, there's some levels in this game and other games in the series that could take you 3 to 4 hours, and if you don't save often, then if you lose, then you're starting over, that kind of thing.
I would say it's definitely better than I remember back in the day. But I don't know if I would pick it up again, but I can definitely say that fans of the strategic style games,
turn-based strategy fans should definitely give this one a look.
Yeah,
for
definitely.
sure. But yeah, hopefully we could see a new Advance Wars game come out in the future.
Oh, that's funny.
Yeah, it's been about a decade, so probably not happening, but we'll see.
I mean, Advance Wars has shown up in Smash Brothers.
That's true.
As an assist.
It gives me hope. Well, that's all we got for this week's episode of the Best Games You Never Played podcast.
Next week we got a great game that I picked out.
Yeah, we got We Love Katimari for the PS2.
It's a game where you just roll stuff up with a big sticky ball.
Well,
it sounds stupid because it is.
Well, tune in next week to see just how stupid it is.
Yeah. I'm Nick.
And I'm Chris.
And thank you for listening to the Greatest Games You Never Played podcast.
Have a good night.